West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The Select Committee has conducted extensive investigative work to understand what led the Proud Boys and other rioters to the Capitol on January 6th. We've obtained substantial evidence showing that the president's December 19th tweet calling his followers to Washington, D.C. on January 6th energized individuals from the Proud Boys and other extremist groups. I'd like to play a brief video highlighting some of this evidence.
My name is Marcus Childress, and I'm an investigative counsel for the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white supremacists.
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by.
After he made this comment, Enrique Terrio, then chairman of the Proud Boys, said on Parler, "Standing by, sir." During our investigation, we learned that this comment during the presidential debate actually led to an increase in membership from the Proud Boys.
Would you say that Proud Boys numbers increased after the stand back, stand by comment?
Exponentially. I'd say tripled probably, with the potential for a lot more eventually.
And did you ever sell any stand back and stand by merchandise?
One of the vendors on my page actually beat me to it, but I wish I would have made a stand back, stand by shirt.
On December 19th, President Trump tweeted about the January 6th rally and told attendees, "Be there, we'll be wild." Many of the witnesses that we interviewed were inspired by the president's call and came to D.C. for January 6th. But the extremists, they took it a step further. They viewed this tweet as a call to arms. A day later, the Department of Justice describes how the Proud Boys created a chat called the Ministry of Self-Defense Leadership Chat. In this chat, the Proud Boys established a command structure in anticipation of coming back to D.C. on January 6th. The Department of Justice describes Mr. Terrio coming into possession of a document called the 1776 Returns, which describes individuals occupying key buildings around the United States Capitol. The Oath Keepers are another group that the committee investigated.
You better get your ass to D.C., folks, this Saturday.
Yeah, if you don't, there'll be no more Republic. But we're not going to let that happen. It's not even an if. It's either President Trump is encouraged and bolstered and strengthened to do what he must do, or we wind up in a bloody fight. We all know that. The fight's coming.
The Oath Keepers began planning to block the peaceful transfer of power shortly after the November 3rd election. And according to the Department of Justice, Stuart Rhodes, the Oath Keepers leader, said to his followers that we were not going to get through this without a civil war. In response to the December 19th, 2020 tweet by President Trump, the Oath Keepers focused on January 6th in Washington, D.C. In response to the tweet, one member, the president of the Florida chapter, put on social media, "The president called us to the Capitol. He wants us to make it wild." The goal was for the Oath Keepers to be called to duty so that they could keep the president in power, although President Trump had just lost the election. The committee learned that the Oath Keepers set up quick reaction forces outside of the city in Virginia where they stored arms. The goal of these quick reaction forces was to be on standby just in case President Trump invoked the Insurrection Act.
Did the Oath Keepers ever provide weapons to members?
I'm going to decline to answer that and put them at grounds for due process grounds.
In footage obtained by the committee, we learned that on the night of January 5th, Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes met in a parking garage in Washington, D.C.
There's mutual respect there. I think we're fighting the same fight, and I think that's what's important.
The committee learned that the Oath Keepers went into the Capitol through the east doors in two stack formations. The DOJ alleges that one of the stacks went into the Capitol looking for Speaker Pelosi, although they never found her. As the attack was unfolding, Mr. Tarrio took credit. In documents obtained by the Department of Justice, Mr. Tarrio said in an encrypted chat, "Make no mistake, and we did this." Later on that evening, Mr. Tarrio even posted a video which seemed to resemble him in front of the Capitol with a black cape, and the title of the video was Premonition. The evidence developed by the Select Committee and the Department of Justice highlights how each group participated on the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. In fact, the investigation revealed that it was individuals associated with the Proud Boys who instigated the initial breach at the Peace Circle at 12:53 p.m. Within 10 minutes, rioters had already filled the Lower West Plaza. By 2 o'clock, rioters had reached the doors on the West and the East Plazas. And by 2:13, rioters had actually broken through the Senate wing door and gotten into the Capitol building. A series of breaches followed. At 2:25 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors to the Rotunda. And then right after 2:40 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors near the Ways and Means room. Once the rioters infiltrated the Capitol, they moved through the crypt, the rotunda, the hallways leading to the House chambers, and even inside the Senate chambers.
Individuals associated with two violent extremist groups have been charged with seditious conspiracy in connection with the January 6th attack. One is the Oath Keepers. They are a group of armed anti-government extremists. The other group is the Proud Boys. They promote white supremacist beliefs and have engaged in violence with people they view as their political enemies. Members of both groups have already pled guilty to crimes associated with the January 6th attack. Mr. Quested, as part of the documentary you've been filming, you gained access to the Proud Boys and their leader, Enrique Tarrio. Your crew filmed them in Washington, D.C. on the evening of January 5th and then on January 6th. On January 5th, the night before the attack, you were with the head of the Proud Boys, Mr. Tarrio, in Washington, D.C. What happened?
We picked up Mr. Tarrio from jail. He'd been arrested for carrying some magazines, some extra capacity magazines, and he took responsibility for the burning of the Black Lives Matter flag that was stolen from the church on December the 12th. We were attempting to get an interview with Mr. Tarrio. We had no idea of any of the events that were going to subsequently happen. We drove him to pick up his bags from the property department of the police, which is just south of the mall. We picked up his bags and went to get some other bags from the Phoenix Hotel, where we encountered Mr. Stuart Rhodes from the Oath Keepers. By the time I'd gone to park the car, my colleague was saying, who'd got into the car with Mr. Tarrio, that they had moved to a location around the corner, the parking garage of the Hall of Legends, I believe. And so we quickly drove over there. We drove down into the parking garage and filmed the scene of Mr. Tarrio and Mr. Rhodes and certain other individuals in that garage. We then continued to follow Mr. Tarrio. There was some discussion about where he was going to go. He ended up going towards a hotel in Baltimore, and we conducted an interview with him in the hotel room. And then we returned to DC for that night. And what was interesting that night actually was that was the first indication that DC was much more busy than it had been any other time we'd been here, because we couldn't get into the hotels we wanted to, and we ended up at a hotel that, you know, was not as satisfactory as we would hoped.
Thank you. So what you're saying is you filmed the meeting between Mr. Tarrio and Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes, right?
Indeed.
You couldn't hear what was said, but according to the Justice Department indictment of Mr. Tarrio, a participant referenced the Capitol. Now, on the morning of January 6th, you learned the Proud Boys would gather near the rally scheduled to take place near the White House. What time did you meet up with the Proud Boys, and what was happening when they met?
We met up with the Proud Boys somewhere around 10:30 a.m. and they were starting to walk down the mall easterly direction towards the Capitol. There was a large contingent, more than I had expected, and I was confused to a certain extent why we were walking away from the president's speech, because that's what I felt we were there to cover.
So at 10:30 a.m., that's early in the day. That's even before President Trump had started speaking. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
So how many Proud Boys would you estimate were marching together to the Capitol?
A couple of hundred. Potentially, yeah, I'd say a couple of hundred Proud Boys were marching towards the Capitol at that point.
At the time, was the area heavily guarded?
No, that was, I remember we walked down the mall, we walked to the right of the reflecting pool, and then north along the road that leads to the Peace Circle. And as we were walking past the Peace Circle, I framed the Proud Boys to the right of my shot with the Capitol behind, and we see one sole police officer at the barriers, which subsequently breached. We then walk up and past a tactical unit preparing, and you see that in the film where the man questions their duty and their honor, and you see maybe a dozen Capitol Police putting on their riot gear.
So how would you describe the atmosphere at that time?
The atmosphere it seemed to be much darker. I make efforts to create a familiarity between myself and my subjects to, make them feel comfortable. And the atmosphere was much darker this day than had been in these other days. And there was also a contingent of Proud Boys that I hadn't met before from Arizona who appeared to wear these orange hats and had orange armbands.
So when the Proud Boys went back down the hill to the Peace Circle, did a larger crowd start together?
Well, no. First of all, we went round to the back and down the steps, and we took some photographs on the east side of the Capitol. And then we went for lunch. We went for tacos.
So, Mr. Questa, you're a journalist, so you are careful to stick to things that you have observed. But what you've told us is highly relevant. Let me highlight a few key facts that you and others have provided the committee. First, there was a large group of Proud Boys present at the Capitol. We know that from multiple sources. You now estimate that there were around 250 to 300 individuals that you've testified. They weren't there for President Trump's speech. We know this because they left that area to march toward the Capitol before the speech began. They walked around the Capitol that morning. I'm concerned this allowed them to see what defenses were in place and where weaknesses might be. And they decided to launch their attack at the Peace Circle, which is the front door of the Capitol complex. It's the first security perimeter that those marching from the ellipse would have to come to as they moved toward the Capitol. The Peace Circle walkway was always where the thousands of angry Trump supporters would arrive after President Trump sent them from the ellipse. The Proud Boys timed their attack to the moments before the start of the joint session in the Capitol, which is also where President Trump directed the angry mob, quote, "We fight like hell," end quote. He told them before sending them down Pennsylvania Avenue, right to where the Proud Boys gathered and where you were filming. Now, a central question is whether the attack on the Capitol was coordinated and planned. What you witnessed is what a coordinated and planned effort would look like. It was the culmination of a months-long effort spearheaded by President Trump. Mr. Quested, thank you for your eyewitness account of the lead up to the breach of the Peace Circle.
It is Monday, the 13th of June of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. And you know what that means. Yeah. And if you don't, I'll tell you. It's where we take what is left over from the weekend, we reconstitute it into a gourmet delight for your gourmet delight. Alrighty. So, the Proud Boys tried to disrupt a pride event in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And they got busted. I don't know. I don't know how that works. Did it put the cops in a bind? Like, wait a second. Those are my bros. I'm going to go arrest my bros. But the cops did seem to be on the job and took these guys down at gunpoint because you have to. They're all in uniform and they're carrying weapons. So that was some good news. Now let's see what happens. We'll see. I'm sure that their legal defense fund will triple, just like their membership did when Trump said to stand back and stand by. Okay, well, since we had such... And I just intended to have a longer clip at the top anyway, but because, you know, if you're listening to this right now, it means that right now being live instead of by podcast. The hearing ostensibly is supposed to be on. I know it was delayed because Stepien had a sudden family emergency that prevented him from being able to testify in person. So his lawyer is going to read a statement, I believe. And yeah, I think that maybe somebody made him an offer he couldn't refuse, or a member of his family. And old Bill said, well, wait a second. I'm not only the campaign manager for Liz Cheney's opponent in Wyoming, I'm getting some pressure from the big guy. Yeah, the guy who keeps calling himself president. What an idiot. You know, this idiot has been pretty much telegraphed from the very beginning that he didn't give one F an iota of any respect to our representative democracy. He was never interested in a peaceful transfer of power, except if he won, and he stated as such. His intent has been known from the very beginning. Now, I understand that there's some scuttlebutt going around that Merrick Garland is actually quite fearful, and probably because he is. God. I got to tell you, it's kind of weird that some people call up the cops and say, I'm having some really bad thoughts. You better come and stop me before I have these bad thoughts act out on themselves. What? Thoughts don't act out on themselves, fella. Okay? There is a machine involved, and that's you. So get out of here. But anyway, and then we have to pretty much completely change our whole security structure because of somebody who called in and said, I'm having some bad thoughts. Where was the concern when a judge's husband and son were shot and the son was killed? I didn't hear any of that. Where was the concern when Sotomayor was threatened by a bomber, even? Coming to her house. Oh, no. But I don't know. I guess maybe people fear those exploding cases of beer at Kavanaugh's house is just a little too dangerous for the neighborhood, so we better make some security measures. That could be it. I mean, you never know what kind of volatile chemicals are there already. All right, well, maybe it's just prudent anyway. But DeSantis was on today. I guess there's about half a dozen people say they're going to blockade the Supreme Court, whatever that means. After we had truckers blockading the thoroughfares and expressways in D.C., with their giant trucks in support of Trump. After the insurrection on January 6th, which we're having a hearing at right now. But, of course, DeSantis is on Fox, so they got to talk about something else. And there's about a half a dozen people saying they're going to blockade the Supreme Court. And DeSantis said that's where the real insurrection is. And if the shoe was on the other foot. Yeah. After you have Trump-appointed judges, one in particular, who has the best record for releasing Trump-affiliated insurrectionists, which is what the insurrection is. Oh, man, the feds come in with a particular sentencing guideline, and he has it or he sends them home. Them being the perp and the prosecutors. Go home. Make a mockery of our system. We were well on our way to doing it ourselves. We didn't need any help from a guy who sold rotten steaks. God. Okay. So you got a U-Haul truck full of Proud Boys. Which also, right on the service agreement it says you can't have any passengers in the trailer. You can't have them in the back of the truck. It says it right there. And for good reason, because of eddying carbon monoxide fumes. You're not even supposed to put a pet in there. But, when you need a troop transport, you got to get a U-Haul, apparently. And I guess because Enterprise, I always make the joke, is that since there's no free Enterprise, they have to go to U-Haul. Not that U-Haul is free, but, So you would think that they could diversify their troop transport insignias. But no, let's go for the U-Haul. If I see a giant U-Haul driving around, or a few of them driving around in a small town in America, I would say, instead of busloads of Antifa that everybody was getting their arms out, by the way. That's what happened here in Rogue River. We had a couple of thousand armed. I don't know what they were. But they were armed, and they were convinced Antifa was coming across the bridge into town. Busloads of Antifa. And I was laughing. What a bunch of brainwashed nincompoops. Yeah, but you got U-Haul truckloads full of fascists and Nazis coming into town. But I guess there's not so much of a threat because they're among peers. That's why it was so shocking that the Coeur d'Alene Police Department went and busted those guys. Because Coeur d'Alene's not known as a bastion of reasonable behavior, shall we say, among the populace. But this particular pride gathering started off as two families going to the park and having a pride flag, having a picnic. And it grew from there over all these years. And apparently it's quite a local event because it brings the neighborhood out. Hi there, neighbor. So, I guess the Proud Boys got caught up on what I call chaos theory. The Nazis never, ever, ever put the equation of chaos theory in any of their projections and predictions about what is going to happen when they bring on, what will it be, the Fifth Reich? I don't know what kind of Reich, what number Reich it is, but they want it. So, one other little tidbit. I did see a guy from the Southern Poverty Law Center and others who deal with specifically right-wing extremism, and calling particularly this group, white nationalists, is not, it sort of hides the fact that they're neo-Nazis. They are. These are the guys that were at the Unite the Right rally when they were going around the synagogue with their tiki torches saying Jews will not replace us. And then since they're so inclusive, they started yelling to everybody, gays, Catholics, of the Archbishop Romero persuasion, I would suppose, and the Maryknoll nuns, okay? And anybody that's a liberal or anything like that, you will not replace us. And then they interspersed it and alternated between you will not replace us and Jews will not replace us while circling a synagogue. Okay? That was Vanguard whatever back then. That's what they called them. And then they killed Heather Heyer. They, being a guy, drove his car through this, and he was part of them. And they had to rebrand, so now they're called Patriot Front. They are neo-Nazis. They are actual Nazis. So calling them simply white supremacists beggars the point. Actually, I don't know if that's the proper cliche, but I'm using it. That white supremacy is not enough to describe a Nazi. All right? And also, in terms of branding, punching a Nazi rolls off the tongue a lot more or a lot better than, punch the white supremacist. You got to lessen the amount of syllables in there. All right? Punch the Nazi. It's 4 syllables, 3 would be better. But hey, here we are. So, as I said, I wasn't going to go so very long on this introduction because we had quite a bit of a long clip there at the top, but I felt it important since not only is the hearing being delayed because of stepping out, but I just thought that we should remind ourselves that these Proud Boys that showed up in Coeur d'Alene, they were standing back and standing by. And then they went to work. They even had, I don't know, the cops, it's a multi-page military battle plan. Okay. I wonder if they can prove intent. We'll have to see. Well, what's on the rest of the menu? As we begin here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. A Virginia city plagued by violence will hold a gun buyback event. I'm sure the Proud Boys are going to show up there and say, no, you don't. An assistant police chief of a suburban city near Seattle who displayed a Nazi insignia will be paid $1.5 million to go away. Wow. Sounds like a growth industry, doesn't it? And a Bremerton, Washington man was charged with threatening to kill the city prosecutor and the mayor. I wonder what his political persuasion is. Guess. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where NATO's eastern nations want better protection measures from the alliance, and who can blame them? And a breakthrough court ruling should lead Olympic sports bodies to reopen cases in the Russian state-backed doping program. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thanks, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link to the left is the Patreon link, and send us money because we need it. Please do. And if you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. The show notes and links diary gets posted at 10 minutes before showtime, and you can find the show notes and links generally when I post them on Twitter. So the show notes and links is where the real reportage can be found, and you might want to utilize it for today's show, since maybe some of the articles might be abbreviated because of time constraints. I wonder how that happened. Anyway, if you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so. Oh, follow me at Justice Putnam, by the way. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, really wherever podcasts can be found. And, of course, now the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. All right. Let's tuck into this first offering from the Associated Press today. And it looks like, staff at the Associated Press brings us this first offering. A Virginia city that has been plagued by violence in recent weeks is planning to hold a gun buyback event. The goal of the event, planned for June 25th, is to reduce the number of guns sold illegally and prevent stolen firearms from being used for violence. The Virginian Pilot reports that Portsmouth residents can hand over a gun and receive money or a gift card in return with no questions asked. Any day we can get one gun out of a kid's hand is a victory in my book, said City Council member Chris Woodward, who voted in support of the program. Of course, the Nazis and the Republicans and the NRA want every kid to have a gun, so I guess this goes against the prime directive of destroying America. The city has had at least a dozen shootings since June 1st, and it's only the 13th, so it's one a day by average, And that was including one that killed 4 people last week, so that's no joke. Police Chief Renato Prince said he was initially opposed to the program because, from his experience, guns handed over are typically those left behind after someone dies, not weapons being used for crime on the street. Somebody said something to me which was, what if that gun buyback program gets a gun out of the house that could have been stolen and used in the commission of a crime? Prince said. Well, that changed his mind. And according to him, it changed his whole world. The program is funded by the Hampton Roads Black Caucus. Vice Mayor DeAndre Barnes voted against the program, saying that the city should address the root cause of what's causing crime and preventing those that are involved in violence from choosing that lifestyle. Well, if you're going to make them wear a particular kind of clothes because they might be looking like gangbangers in a particular kind of clothes, how about this? How about banning the fashion accessory of a gun? More Associated Press staff bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A suburban Seattle city will pay more than $1.5 million to settle a dispute with a former assistant police chief who was disciplined for posting a Nazi rank insignia on his office door and joking about the Holocaust. Former Kent Assistant Police Chief Derek Camerzell, who had been with the department for nearly 3 decades, was initially given just 2 weeks of unpaid leave after the 2020 incident. Outraged residents and members of the Jewish community prompted Mayor Dina Ralph to put Camerzell on paid administrative leave and demand his resignation. The city's attempt to essentially discipline Camerzell a second time led to a dispute between his lawyers and the city that appeared headed for litigation. But interim city chief administrative officer Arthur Pat Fitzpatrick, who is also the city attorney, said the city had resolved the matter through negotiations. Ralph, in calling for Camerzell's resignation in January, acknowledged that the decision to revisit the discipline issue would likely come at a high cost. The city said that it would pay him $1.5 million to resign. Had the city simply fired him, he likely would have won back his job through arbitration due to federal and state labor laws. An internal investigation concluded Camerzell knew the meaning of the insignia he placed above the nameplate on his office door in September of 2020, that of an Obergruppenführer, a high official in Hitler's paramilitary Schutzstaffel, or SS, which was responsible for the systematic murders of millions of Jews and others in Europe during World War II. The insignia was taken down after 4 days when a detective in the Investigations Bureau, which Camerzell commanded, filed a complaint. Camerzell was also overheard joking about the Holocaust, according to the internal investigation. Staff at Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. A 44-year-old Bremerton man was charged with making threats to kill and intimidating a public servant after a lengthy standoff with a SWAT team from the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office on Thursday. Joseph James Beckman is accused of threatening to shoot a Bremerton city prosecutor or himself with his rifle if the prosecutor did not drop his pending charges, the Kitsap Sun reported. The man is also accused of leaving a voicemail at the Bremerton mayor's office threatening bloodshed and violence if the mayor did not intervene in his pending criminal cases. The calls prompted a standoff outside a home on Thursday between the man and a SWAT team. He had previously been charged with felony possession of firearms and assault. He also had a misdemeanor warrant out for his arrest for driving with a suspended license. I wonder which one they considered to be the most important. The SWAT team used tear gas to force the man out of the residence. He wore a gas mask, but eventually the irritants overcame his mask, according to court documents. I bet he has a beard. The man was booked into the Kitsap County Jail with his bail set at $250,000. On Friday, Beckman was charged with intimidating a public servant, harassment of a criminal justice participant, harassment with threats to kill, and unlawful possession of a firearm. Well. Well, that brings us to our break, and why don't we? And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, body horror elevated. Crimes of the Future is a hard movie to classify, which just might be the intention of the film's Canadian writer-director David Cronenberg. Set sometime in the near future, the humans in Crimes of the Future have evolved past their ability to feel pain, which isn't a stretch after enduring the prescription drug ads in an average hour of TV. Along with that, they are developing, as in the case with the protagonist Saul, the ability to grow new organs. Saul, in fact, has turned this into performance art. Along with his creative and life partner Caprice, he now entertains paying audiences with live surgeries depicted with disturbing precision. Saul, played by a wonderfully understated Viggo Mortensen, is an artist who literally exposes and places himself in vulnerable situations. His insides being revealed is symbolically analogous to Cronenberg's own life. It can be interpreted almost as a roundabout autobiography. Written over 20 years ago, this is Cronenberg at the peak of his weirdness. This film isn't for everyone, nor is it easy to understand, but nonetheless it is one of the most original and starkly beautiful films to have come out in some time. Everything from the cast, fronted by the aforementioned Mortensen, with performances from Léa Seydoux and Kristen Stewart, to the retro sets with some of the strangest furniture you'll ever see, work to great effect. This one achieves notoriety for working in a genre that often goes horribly wrong and creating a thoughtful and profound mystery, drama, and meditation on what it means to be human, even as humans constantly grow and change. An art house feature that cares little for a satisfying conclusion, Crimes of the Future is an intellectual exercise that makes for an unforgettable movie experience. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Hedgehogs are a lot of things. They're small and spiky, covered in quills, and some people even say they're cute. Now, a new study says that they are also the origin of resistance to methicillin, an antibiotic derived from penicillin. That pointed observation appears in the journal Nature. Antibiotic resistance is a huge clinical problem, and methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, otherwise known as MRSA or MRSA, can be difficult to treat, as many have developed resistance to a handful of our frontline therapeutics.
Historically, it has been assumed that resistance in disease-causing bacteria, including Staph aureus, is a modern phenomenon driven by clinical use of antibiotics.
Jesper Larsen is a senior scientist at the Statens Serum Institute in Copenhagen,
which is the Danish equivalent of the CDC in the US.
Methicillin resistance was thought to be tied to prescription, in part because methicillin-resistant bugs were first isolated from British hospitals just a year after the drug became available for clinical use.
But a couple of years ago, we found out by chance that MRSA is present in more than 60% of hedgehogs from Denmark and Sweden.
Okay, what's MRSA? Methicillin and penicillin belong to the so-called beta-lactam family of antibiotics. They kill bacteria by inhibiting enzymes the bugs use to build their protective cell walls. MEC-C and a related gene MEC-A encode versions of the enzymes that the antibiotics don't latch onto as well.
Staph aureus bacteria carrying these genes are therefore resistant to most beta-lactam antibiotics.
But where did these resistance genes come from? They've been spotted not only in folks with staph infections, but in livestock, like pigs and cattle, and in some wild animals. And in Sweden, Larsson found that MEC is really common in hedgehogs.
So the big question was, why hedgehogs carry so much McC.
To find out, Larsson went to the library,
where I came across an old study from the 1960s, which showed that a particular fungus in hedgehogs is able to produce a penicillin-like antibiotics that is very similar to methicillin.
So hedgehogs with this particular skin fungus would naturally be exposed to penicillin. And that could have launched an evolutionary arms race that drove the hedgehog's resident bacteria to evolve resistance.
This was a real eureka moment and led us to hypothesize that wild hedgehogs has been a natural reservoir of McC long before penicillin and methicillin came on the market.
To confirm this suspicion, Larsson and his colleagues screened hedgehogs from Europe and New Zealand. They found that hedgehogs in Scandinavia and the UK harbor a heavy load of MEC MRSA. They also found that the fungus carried by those hedgehogs had all the genes they needed to produce penicillin.
We then went on and sequenced and analyzed the genomes of around 1,000 McC isolates, which showed that they first appeared in hedgehogs in the early 1800s, long before we started to use antibiotics in human and veterinary medicine.
Now, that doesn't mean that we should feel free to use antibiotics all over the place, because it's not our fault, it's the hedgehogs. Because if having antibiotics around encourages bacteria to evolve resistance, taking antibiotics away robs them of their superpower, and it leaves them a little bit weaker than their non-resistant kin.
It is often very energy-consuming to produce the enzymes and inactivate the antibiotics. This means that resistant bacteria will often be outcompeted by susceptible bacteria in periods where they are not exposed to antibiotics.
So, if we really want to show MRSA no mercy, we should keep the methicillin to a minimum, and maybe keep at least a quill's length away from Scandinavian hedgehogs. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkins.
Wouldn't it be great if life came with a remote control? You know, you could hit pause when you needed to, or hit rewind, like that time you knocked down that wasp's nest.
Uh-oh.
Well, life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome, but prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes, you can stop prediabetes before it leads to type 2 diabetes. To learn your risk, take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its prediabetes awareness partners.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. A big part of digital citizenship is doing the right thing online. That is, respecting yourself and everyone else you interact with. Here are 2 simple guidelines. First, respect yourself. Be careful what you bring into your life. The internet and social media are full of wonderful things, but there are some corners of the web that you should stay away from, such as accounts and sites that post violent content, or content that insults or degrades other people. If you're a student, you might ask yourself whether you'd be okay with your parents or your favorite teacher knowing whether you access this content. If the answer is no, then you should stay away from it. Second, respect other people. This includes your classmates, the people you work with, and even perfect strangers in the digital world. It's never okay to bully other people, even people you find obnoxious or that have views that you think are irresponsible. It's okay to express yourself, but it's important that you, as an American, do your part to preserve the American tradition of civil discourse. That is, discussing things respectfully, including politics, without resorting to personal attacks. This episode was made possible by the support of T-Mobile. 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1991. That was the day that a San Francisco man, Jeffrey Collins, received $5.3 million for wrongful termination from Shell Oil. The judge ruled the company had fired Jeffrey because they found out he was gay. Jeffrey had been a second-generation Shell employee. His dad worked for the company for 37 years before retiring. Jeffrey worked for their Triton Biosciences division. He oversaw a team working on developing drugs for cancer, AIDS, and other diseases. For 19 years, he had received positive reviews and 9 promotions. He rose to become the second highest executive for Triton. All of that changed when management found an invitation to a party for gay men that Jeffrey planned to attend. And for that, they fired him. The company claimed they made this decision after reevaluating his performance. They stated that they felt Jeffrey could not be effective as a leader once his team learned of his off-the-job activities. After his firing, Jeffrey could not find a similar job. Despite all of this, he was willing to settle out of court for far less money. But Shell decided to fight the wrongful termination charges. Cases such as the one brought by Jeffrey helped to bring to light the employment discrimination faced by many in the LGBT community. Since his case, California, along with 28 other states and the District of Columbia, have passed laws prohibiting firings based on sexual orientation. 32 states have laws against discrimination based on gender identity. 434 of the Fortune 500 companies have implemented similar policies. Yet, despite these gains, protecting and improving LGBT rights on the job remains an important fight for today's labor movement. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 55 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the mid to upper 60s, and cloudy skies in the morning will become partly cloudy in the afternoon. Winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Lows overnight will be in the mid to upper 40s, a little chilly, and we'll have partly cloudy skies with winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then some clouds in the morning tomorrow will give way to mainly sunny skies for the afternoon with highs in the mid to upper 70s, winds out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County were updated late Friday. We now stand with confirmed cases at 450,052, and deceased also increased by a couple and stands at 546. It's not over. Grass pollen is rated very high here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is good at 26 parts per million, and that daytime UV index, though, is very high at level 9. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.2 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 75%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 70 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 75 and sunny. Rome is 88 and fair. Kyiv is 83 and fair. Kabul is 70 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 84 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 66 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 50 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 60 degrees and sunny. And New York is a sweltering 82 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and partly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Stephen McGrath and Nicolai Dumatrache of the Associated Press bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. 9 NATO nations on the alliance's eastern flank held talks in Romania ahead of a key NATO summit later this month, with some leaders urging NATO to step up protections for them in light of Russia's protracted war against Ukraine. The summit in Bucharest provided a platform for NATO's eastern members to discuss regional security issues and forge a united voice within the 30-member security alliance. Those attending included Romania, Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. NATO is set to hold a strategic concept summit at the end of June in Madrid to reaffirm its values and purpose and to map out future goals.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Graham Dunbar of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A breakthrough court ruling in the Russian doping saga could lead Olympic sports bodies to revisit evidence for possible disciplinary cases against other athletes, the World Anti-Doping Agency said. 3 Russian canoeists, including a 2012 Olympic champion, were banned by the Court of Arbitration for Sport on Friday for their part in a state-backed doping program 8 years ago. The WADA prosecuted the case using evidence it received from a Moscow laboratory that had been manipulated and withheld by Russian authorities for several years. The organization has also given Moscow lab data to about 40 other sports bodies since 2019 and now wants some of them to review those cases after the evidence held up in court. It creates a precedent. If they have the similar kind of evidence available, they should prosecute the cases, Director General Olivier Nigli told the AP on Saturday. He spoke on the sidelines of a WADA annual conference where the Moscow lab affair was described as the biggest and most complex investigation in world sports that costs millions of dollars. WADA has doubted some governing bodies' commitment to investigating the Russian athletes who have mostly retired from competing. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.